Hi, Sandy. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm all right, thank you very much. It's lovely to meet you. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
coming to do this.
Hey, who's that behind you?
This here is Nala. She's like my little comfort blanket. So
Wow, you're so lucky to work like that. That is so cool.
I am. She's been absolutely milking all the attention today as well. She just goes to every student.
So you're actually at work?
Yeah, this is in the office. Do you want to see the office? I'll do a quick show.
Yeah, go on then.
So here's our kitchen area.
Ooh. See, I don't need to come in. This is just as good.
Well, I suppose so. Although you should come in one day. It'd be nice to have you come into the office.
Yeah, one day I'll come in.
Will's about to join. And then this is our...
Good evening.
Hello, Will.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello, hello.
Will, this is
I'm
Sandy.
good.
Sandy, this is Will.
Nice to meet you.
I was just giving her a... Will, have you
Will,
seen...
you've got a very mellow voice, Will.
Mellow? Mellow as in
Yeah.
quiet or
Yeah,
mellow as in
you
actually mellow?
just came on like, hello, welcome, hello. You know, I thought it was very cool and mellow, that.
I've literally just come straight from another phone call, so I'm headed into the Zoom thing already.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Will, you're a product owner, are you right now? Is that what your role is?
No, product developer. It's a title specific to the company I've just moved to. Software engineer, software developer previously of North Coder's early days, a few years into my career now, I guess. So it bears relevance to the people on the course now, I guess, in terms of I'll be talking my experience, I think. So I work for an agency. We're consultants. A similar vein, so you might know ThoughtWorks or Infinity Works, that kind of thing. And so I'm currently working on a fast fashion client, building some in-house systems for them. First time as a consultant, so that's sort of quite interesting, especially specific to the topic of today. So yeah, interesting things going on.
So, Dr. Sandy, you're the author of Why Do I Feel Like an Imposter? You're here to tell us about how we can find solutions to imposter syndrome, which does affect us in working lives. I think it's quite common in software development. Can you tell us a bit about what imposter syndrome is?
So imposter syndrome is that feeling that you get when you think that you're not really good enough. So I know loads of people have this when they feel they're not really good enough. So it's specifically for people who objectively are good enough and on paper, and everybody else will look at them and go, what are you talking about? You're brilliant, you're brilliant. But you genuinely think, no, I'm punching above my weight here. I shouldn't have got this job. I'm only here by chance, by fluke, by luck. You know, there's some other reason why I've been appointed, but I'm not here on merit and I'm not good enough. So it's different from people who are genuinely not good enough, or may genuinely not be good enough. And it's a little bit different from a sort of self-confidence thing per se. You know, there is genuine evidence that you're good enough, but you look for other reasons to validate, to disvalidate that and say, well, I'm not good enough because, and looking at all these other different reasons.
But how common do you think imposter syndrome is? Is it, I know it's quite common in our industry, but is it something that CEOs and people, really?
Yeah, it really is everywhere. And the research that's been done suggested, the research was actually done on women originally. So all the research, whenever we talk about imposter syndrome, it's always talked about women, but it isn't just, it just so happened that the first research was done with women, but it's everywhere, men and women. And they reckon about 70% of us feel like we're imposters. And yeah, it is massive. And people I speak to in all sorts of industries who are also, you know, people who are successful and come to my clinic. I'm director of the Mind Training Clinic in Manchester. You might have heard of us. And people come to me and they all go, yeah. And I say to them, have you heard about imposter syndrome? I go, yeah. But I really am an imposter. You know, everybody else, they're really good at what they do, but I'm genuinely not, you know, so I'm the real imposter. And it's that kind of feeling that even though we know about it, everyone thinks that they're the real imposter.
Do you think it's more prevalent with women than it is in men? Sorry.
No, I don't think it is. I think the research was done on women because they thought that, and it was done, I think, in the 70s or 80s, you know, at a time when women were starting to achieve in the workplace. But the workshops that are done, the research now, and it's just as prevalent with men, I think. Although I think women are more likely to talk about it. I think men are less likely to talk about it. But what I find as well is that it doesn't just apply to the workplace. So in my book, I talk about imposter in all sorts of other arenas, like imposters' parents. So, mums who don't think they're good enough at being mums, and dads who don't think they're good enough at being dads. Or particularly with men, actually, there's an imposterish kind of macho thing where men don't think that they're man enough, and they've got to keep proving that they're man enough. That sort of thing for some people.
Will, what's your experience with imposter syndrome? Because you've come quite far from finishing North Coders.
Imposter syndrome wasn't something I was even aware of before getting into the tech industry. I feel like I understand that 70% of people roughly have dealt with imposter syndrome at some point, but it seems to be especially prevalent in the tech industry. And like I say, I wasn't even aware of the term prior to starting my first job at Late Rooms, for instance. And then as soon as I learned about it and did some reading on it and some research, I understood that I'd been feeling that way for quite a long time. And as Dr. Sandi mentioned, in all sort of walks of life, not just my career and what I did previously. But yeah, like you say, the whole macho thing, comparing yourself to other blokes at the gym or wherever it is. So yeah, I wasn't even aware of it being a formal feeling, nonetheless thinking that anyone else felt this way. So it's been a big sort of learning experience for me over the sort of 2-3 years that I've been within the industry, having only since discovered it then.
I was just going to say, do you still feel like you're an imposter, Will?
Yeah, it's not gone away. I deal with it a lot better than I did do. I think, particularly in the early stages of my career, when I was a junior developer, if you like. My first 3 months at my first job at Late Rooms, I was convinced I wasn't going to pass my 3-month probation, and that's all I could focus on. And most days after I finished work, I would be like, what did I do that might make me fail my probation today? It was really, really prevalent in my early career, especially. I deal with it a little bit better now. But yeah, it's still.
I wanted to call my book something afraid and a fraud and afraid, something about fraud. I wanted to get that in the title, but I was outvoted. But if you look, there's a lot of examples in the book. I can't remember them all, but of really famous celebrity people, actors in the performing arts. I mean, you talk, Will, about it being very common in the coding industry, but actually performing arts is massive for imposters. And you get all these really amazing people like Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep, and they're all saying, yeah, I feel like an imposter, and somebody's going to turn up and take my Oscar away. They're going to find out what I'm really like, and I can't act, and all this sort of stuff. And we just sit there thinking, what? But it's prevalent, it's everywhere.
A previous career was as a musician and composer, and working for record labels and making music for a living. So yeah, it's like I say, I think it is prevalent in tech, but it's only since, because like I say, since entering the tech industry, it's only since then that I've actually become aware of the term imposter syndrome. I certainly felt it in my 10 years in music.
Did you feel it? So as you were making music, so I always think back to this is a analogy that I always use whenever I talk about my own imposter syndrome, where you get singers who are coming onto shows like the X Factor, where they think they're amazing, and it's good that they think they're amazing, but it turns out that they're not. And did you ever feel like that when you were doing, before North Coders, when you were in music? Did you ever feel like the stuff you were making wasn't that good, or were you confident in what you were making?
I was proud of what I made after I made it. However, the way my imposter syndrome manifested itself in my music is I would really struggle to finish things. I would throw stuff out all the time that was perfectly fine. But the amount of times that I would spend all night writing a piece of music for whatever job I was doing at the time, and go away for half an hour, come back and think, no, that's absolutely crap. I'm going to throw it away. And I threw away work all the time. So that's how it manifested itself for me. Whenever I finished something, I was quite proud of it and I wouldn't mind showing it off. But the imposter syndrome led to me rarely finishing things, or not as much as I should have done.
Dr. Sandi, how do you think our childhoods have led into imposter syndrome? Do you think they've had an impact on the way we were brought up? Do you think that's had an impact on the way we think, or is this something that's quite natural in work?
Our childhood can definitely have an impact. There are certain childhood or upbringings that can contribute to imposter syndrome, but that's not to say that everybody who's got imposter syndrome will have had these, but there are certain things that make you more prevalent. So for example, if you have had a childhood where you were maybe typecast as a certain thing, like maybe you had a sibling and they were the clever one or the mathematical one or the this one or that one, and you were sort of typecast in a different role, then you're always kind of trying to live up to that and feeling that you're never quite good enough because your sibling was that one, the golden child in that sphere. But equally, it could have the opposite effect. Maybe you were the golden child and you put on this pedestal and you kind of think, well, I'm not sure I can reach these great giddy heights and I'm not that good. Or there's other things that it's not necessarily to do with our parents, but maybe you were a high achiever at school and you feel that actually you're not really going to able to keep that going. Or maybe you were a high achiever early on, and if you found things quite easy to start. I've seen this a lot with people who start school and they're one of the oldest in the years. So they go through their primary years just, sitting back and laughing because they're doing really well and they get all the awards and all the prizes and everything. But then as everyone catches up and they go through high school, they find it difficult to maintain that without working really hard. But they've grown up believing that you don't have to work hard to be good. Yeah. And so if you have to work hard, then I'm not good enough. And there's this kind of element that some people feel that we have to achieve things without effort. We have to just be able to do it. And I think society contributes to that with our sort of Photoshop society. So we see everything. We only see the perfect finished results. We don't see all the efforts to get there. So if someone does a painting, it might take them 100 attempts before they say, yeah, this is good enough. Or you with your music or whatever will. But I think sometimes people think that if you can't do it effortlessly, you're not good enough. So I get people and I go, oh wow, you're really talented, and they go, yeah, but I'm not, because I've had to work so hard to achieve that. And they think that because they've had to work so hard, that means they're not talented and not good enough. So there's so many different factors, society, upbringing, nurture, things that we just can't do anything about that are going to contribute. Another thing as well that can contribute is if you are somebody who's a bit of an outlier, you're out there setting a trend. You're the first one in your demographic to achieve something. This is why it was very common with women in the sort of 70s, because they were breaking the glass ceiling and all that, and they were sort of the token woman in an organization. And I don't know whether you get that in the tech industry. I imagine it's quite male dominated, but maybe I'm wrong.
It is.
I like to think it's not anymore.
Funnily enough, I'm part of a mental health group at my new place of work, and it is a slight out. The tech industry is quite rightly, as you said, male dominated, and it's a big problem. And there is a big movement currently to get more women into tech and promote the tech industry. And my company, fortunately, does quite well in promoting that cause. And one of the things I was talking about with a few of my colleagues today who were women, they were talking about how they all suffered imposter syndrome when they first entered the industry, because they all thought that perhaps the company was just filling a quota, that they had to hire them because they're a woman and not necessarily because they were good at the job. And they all were in agreement. And so obviously being unable to understand that myself, that was quite interesting for me to hear.
Yeah, you get that a lot as well with people from minority groups. If they're in an area where they're not very well represented, and they think, well, they're only here because they're the token black person or disabled person or whatever. So it is very common in groups like that. But also, if you were the first in your family to go to university, or the first in your family to work in tech or something like that, you can feel that pressure to perform, and it can create the sort of imposterish syndrome. An interesting study that I talk about in the book is in Harvard University, which obviously a top uni, there was this example where on the first day they got this big lecture theatre of all these new students, and they said to them, right, if anybody in this room thinks that you got here by mistake and you're just lucky to get in and they didn't really read your application, you got here by luck, raise your hand. And everyone kind of looks around, and a few people raise their hand, but by the end of it, more than half have raised their hands. So that's a lot of people. And then they say, whoever was giving the speech said, I just want you to know, Harvard never makes mistakes. So you're all here by merit, but everybody thinks they're not, or loads of people think they're not. So, it's just really common across all the sectors.
Do you think, so if I tell you about the bootcamp, so anybody who's done North Coders, they tend to come from a background that's completely different. So for me, I worked in a call centre. Will, you spoke about working in the music industry. Some of us, did you sort of get into code before North Code as well, or was it completely new to you?
No, I started coding about a month and a half, 2 months before I started the course.
Really?
It was all pretty last minute.
So it's like, and so I'd had a little bit of experience with building websites before, Dr. Sandi, but it was the same. JavaScript was a completely new concept to me once I started the course. Then it's 12 weeks of essentially getting absolutely hammered with information, learning how to build projects. And then before you know it, you're in a role. So within about 3 or 4 months, I was a software developer. And I do wonder if that contributes to imposter syndrome, because you can't help but feel like a bit of a fraud when you're in there. I know you mentioned as a junior, Will, that you were really suffering from it. I know that while I was a junior, for those first few months, regardless of how helpful everyone else was around me, I still just felt like I was there by fluke, and that I was like you said before, like I was going to get caught out. Do you think that moving into a role?
I was going to say another related to that, another very significant area where people feel imposterish is when they've kind of got to the next level, they've achieved something. So it's kind of like you're talking, so maybe you're on the course and then you're suddenly in a job and you've got to that next level, or somebody's just got onto a degree course, or they've got onto a master's level program or a PhD or whatever, or they've got a job, a promotion, whatever it is, you've got to that next stage and you're looking around you and you think everybody else is more qualified than me. It's that stage, it's that kind of thing that I think you're talking about.
Particularly with this course, because it's a great course and you learn a lot. It is very intense. And I've said this in a couple of talks I've given at North Coders since. My biggest worry was that if the North Coders felt a little bit like a bubble, I didn't know when I was on the course how my experiences here would translate into the real world, right? I didn't know what level I was at because I was surrounded by people in the same boat. I didn't know if I was going to go into a job and be absolutely fine, or I didn't know if I was going to go into a job and think, holy shit, I don't know what I'm doing. And the honest truth is it's somewhere in the middle, I think.
I still feel scared now that if I was to leave North Coders, I wouldn't, but if I was to leave North Coders and find a job somewhere else, that I wouldn't have a clue what I was doing. Even though I've built projects and I know that I'm good at what I do somehow, there's something in the back of my mind that says I am good at what I do. I still feel like if I went to a new company, I'd just be absolutely lost. You were saying that as a junior, it really stressed you out and it stopped you from asking for help. How did you try to overcome that? Did you just let it eat away at your soul and just sort of have sleepless nights and smash loads of coffee to get your brain in the
For the most part, the industry is pretty good and pretty welcoming. I was very, very lucky to land somewhere like Late Rooms, and that had a really good culture. They believed in pair programming. All the practices that I'd been doing at North Coders were there at Late Rooms, so I was quite lucky in that respect. I've since worked in places that aren't that don't wrap you in cotton wool, if you like to use that phrase, and it's difficult. Yeah, for sure. I'm quite introverted in work. I don't particularly like asking for help. That is part of the imposter syndrome, right? I don't want to burden other people with my problems. I feel like I probably should be able to solve this myself. So a lot of the time it's perseverance, but also at the same time, it's you have to get over that barrier that's stopping you from asking for help. There's absolutely no shame. I had senior engineers coming up to me as a junior asking for my opinion on things, or if they didn't know something that they know I did, they'd come and ask me for help. It's just what people in the industry do. And if all else fails, you've got Google, of course. So it's overcoming that barrier and perhaps dropping a little bit of pride.
Yeah, Dr. Sandi, do you think that imposter syndrome can actually help you be better at your job? Do you think that being able to look at yourself and what you're making and being able to be critical of it is actually a way of a natural way for you to get better at whatever you're doing? Do you think that if it wasn't for imposter syndrome, we wouldn't be making our best stuff, and actually imposter syndrome is why we're good at our jobs?
To some extent, definitely. In fact, the people who are not imposters are the ones that worry me more because they're the ones who are really confident and maybe overconfident. It was interesting what you said right at the start, Will, or one of you, I can't remember which one of you said it, about the X factors and how brilliant they think they are. I bet they don't. I bet none of them think they're brilliant. You know, I've seen really successful people. I work with people who performers as well. You know, some very, very successful people, and none of them think they're successful. So, you know, but they strive to do better because they don't believe in the hype. They don't believe what everybody says, and they, you know, they push themselves. They strive a bit harder. You talked about perfectionism, I think, Will, and it's true. That's one of the downsides of being an imposter, but it's also one of the upsides because, you know, you want to do the best work. You don't take for granted that everyone's just going to fall at your feet and think you're wonderful. So it's the people who don't think they're imposters, who are totally confident in what they do, and they don't need to check anything, and they're quite happy with themselves. They don't need to do any improvement. They don't need to go on any courses. They don't need to improve. Those are the people I worry about more. So a little bit of imposter syndrome is probably good for us. But I think the things that you're talking about, you know, how to manage it, what Will's saying, is really important. If we manage it well, then it keeps that edge to us, you know. But we need to manage it. We need to. One of the symptoms of imposter syndrome is not asking for help, as you said, Will, because one reason being that, you know, if you ask for help, everyone will realise how awful you are, you know, that you need help. But you're right, we have to ask for help, and it's not a sign that you're not good enough to ask for help. On the contrary, you know, it's a sign that you are good enough to ask for help. So things like that, and also talking about it. So this sort of thing that we're doing now, talking about it, raising awareness, talk to your mates about it, talk to other people, get it out in the open. But the other thing that I think we should be doing is really trying to look at what skills you've got, looking at it more objectively. So you were saying, Ian, that you don't think you'd be able to get another job, you know, and yet you know how good you are. Well, I would say, well, you know, let's see the evidence of how good you are. You know, write down all the things that you've done. Write down why you're good at what you do. And then you'll look at that and think, well, actually, who wouldn't employ me? Look at what I've done. Look at what I've achieved. I've no doubt that you've got a lot of achievements there. So sometimes it's about, you know, looking at it objectively and trying not to make excuses. So, for example, if you've got somebody, you're talking about university degrees, you know, you've got somebody with a university degree, they'll all come out, and none of them will come out, or not many of them will come out and say, oh yeah, I'm great, I've got a degree. Most of them will come out and say, yeah, well, you know, I only got this because of that. It was that there was fluke, and I was really lucky with the questions on the paper and all that sort of stuff. So we have to separate out what element is luck. And it's true, there's always going to be an element of luck. But, you know, it might be 10, 20% luck, but there's always that main element, which has got to be your skill. So, you know, I would say write down what you've done, what your achievements are. If you think there's an element of luck, be objective. You know, what element of that do you think is luck? What element of that is your skill? And if you're really struggling, ask other people to rate you. You know, what am I good at? What do you think I'm good at? And they're probably better at selling you than you are, you know, and they'll say, good say, you're brilliant at this, you know, this is what you've achieved. And sometimes we just need to listen to the others as well.
Asking for Will, do you ever ask for feedback in your role? I know I've done that recently. I've just said, look, to my boss, am I rubbish or am I okay? Please tell me.
So funnily enough, up until now, no. However, the current company where I've just come to really fosters a feedback culture, which I'm finding very, very helpful. Although, sort of a double-edged sword, if it's all positive, I tend to not believe it. My imposter syndrome kicks in again and said, well, they're lying. They're just trying to make me feel good. So I often find constructive feedback way better. And I often find that it sits with me a little bit better if, not negative, but something constructive, something that I could be doing better, right? Because that means my mind's not wondering, thinking, what have I done wrong? Especially if all the feedback is positive. And in some cases it is. Sometimes you've just done a good job. But I don't know, I guess the perfectionist in me always thinks there's something to improve. I'd be interested, Dr. Sandi, to hear sort of like what you think you mentioned obviously imposter syndrome can be a good thing, and the little bit of perfectionism can sort of give you an edge. But at what point does it become crippling perfectionism? If that makes sense, like where does it stop becoming healthy?
I think you probably know that. I think people, not just you, people probably know when they're spending too long on a project. If you're working all hours and working the night and you've not got a life because everything has to be perfect, it's taking over. It's becoming crippling, literally. So I always advise people to submit stuff when you don't think it's perfect, because there's no such thing as perfect. It's never going to be perfect. You either run out of time, you never, or you submit it when it's not perfect. Nobody ever says, yeah, this is perfect now, I'm going to submit it. You have to decide what's good enough. And sometimes it's just training yourself to say, right, I know this isn't perfect, I'm going to submit it even though I know it's not perfect. I'm going to accept the good enough. And it's also about making mistakes and allowing yourself to make mistakes and seeing that that's okay. So it's just getting rid of this perfectionist culture. So it's saying, I'm going to allow this not to be perfect, and maybe I will make a mistake and that's okay because I'll learn from it and I'm human. It's that kind of thing. So you know when it's taking over your life and you know you need to do something about it.
Well, I just want to go back to, so now you mentioned that you're a product developer. It's more of a consultative role now. How are you finding, so from being a junior, it's obviously, everyone's going to think I'm rubbish. I shouldn't really ask for help because it's going to make me look like I don't know what I'm doing. That's what life's like as a junior. Now you're on a consultant role. What's imposter syndrome like now for you? How are you experiencing it?
So it's almost like being back at square one. Being a consultant is vastly, vastly different to just being a developer in-house somewhere. Day one of this job, I was in meetings with executives of this client, important meetings, expected to talk, present in front of these people. So my imposter syndrome is right back where it was when I was a junior at the minute. But with the added experience that the past 3 years has taught me and the confidence that comes with that. And I think taking that leap of faith, like Dr. Sandi said, just submitting it, it's never going to be perfect. We're all human. Has paid off, and I'm coming out of my shell much quicker this time round. But like I say, it was very much at the start of it, at the start of this job, very much the same feeling as I was when I went into my first development job, because it is that different.
Dr. Sandi, how can we overcome imposter syndrome? What are the tactics for overcoming it? And can we actually ever get rid of it? Is it not just something that we're stuck with for the rest of our lives, or is it something that can be overcome? Because as we were saying before, it helps you do better to a degree.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's something that I guess we're going to retain a little bit of, and maybe it's good to retain a little bit of. But all the things that I talked about before are the ways to overcome it. Talking about it, writing down objectively your achievements, getting it on paper, asking friends to verify it. Being a little bit looking at this and say, well, what would you say about your friend? If your friend had these achievements, would you say that they're an imposter? Looking at those sorts of strategies, learning to make mistakes, doing things deliberately where you're going to make mistakes, submitting things before they're perfect, and knowing that, making a conscious decision. And you might be surprised, you probably will be surprised to find that when you submit things that aren't perfect, that you get just as good feedback as when you spent hours and hours and worked all night to get them perfect. So it's just these little changes that can just help slightly turn down the thermostat a little bit. So you probably will retain that imposterish feeling. And I think it will flare up at times when you go to the next stage. So like you will, when you become a consultant, you go to whatever you call it, you go to the next stage. Anytime that you go to the next phase, the next stage, you meet the next level of achievement, that's when it will kick in again. But hopefully you start to manage it again. But it's just being aware and talking about it, I think.
Do you address how to overcome it in your book? As well as talking around it.
I mean, there's loads of stuff on how to overcome it in the book. Why do I feel like an imposter? Because that was the whole point. It has to be how to cope with it. The subtitles, how to understand how to cope with it, because you can't just, no point just understanding. You've got to cope with it. You've got to have strategies, and some of those strategies will be different depending on where you're at and what sort of place you are. But all the things that I've talked about really just expanded on in the book.
Is there a risk of overcompensating though? And how you're saying, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Is there a way of just being bullish and just not caring about feedback and
Well, I don't think that's the right. I think we should care about feedback, but I think it's about accepting that you're not perfect and not beating yourself up if you get something wrong. I think as a society, we're very unforgiving about mistakes. If anyone does anything wrong, a lot of cultures, a lot of businesses are very unforgiving about mistakes, but really we should be seeing mistakes as really good opportunities to learn. So it's fear of making mistakes that can feed imposter syndrome. And I think if you take some of that fear away and say, yeah, okay, I'm doing my best, but I might make a mistake because I'm human, then you're not feeling quite the same pressure.
and you mentioned, what was your clinic called? The Mind Training Clinic?
Yeah, the Mind Training Clinic in Manchester. So if you do suffer from anxiety, depression, or a trauma, I specialise in as well. It's a good place to have a look on the website. Lots of resources on there as well. And also, the only thing I will add that, we're in difficult times. You're in quite an unusual position there, Ian, in your workplace, but most of us, as you can see from me, are working from home, and it's unusual times. And I think we haven't got the same feedback opportunities perhaps that we used to have, just bumping into somebody over the water cooler and them giving you those sort of positive strokes. So I think they are difficult times, and maybe we do have to reach out a little bit more to get that feedback, as Will's been doing. So be kind to each other, be kind to yourselves. I'm going to have to run now, so it's been great talking to you guys.
You too, Dr. Sandi. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciated it. Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you. Speak soon.
Bye.